This is just embarrassing. I don't know what the is going on here. I don't know what it's doing. Just, nowhere near the amount of load required to elicit overload and adaptation in a fully grown man. What's up, guys? This is Keir from Strength Coach Network, back on the reactions. And in today's video, we're going to look at quite possibly one of the all-time greats from the pantheon of absolutely atrocious strength and conditioning videos on the internet. It's a few years old, but I wanted to dig into the archives because this thing is so bad. It's Atletico Madrid, and ironically, this comes from the time period when they were winning the Champions League, when they were one of the best teams in Europe, hands down. And it does a very nice job of reinforcing to us the relative importance of physical preparation relative to tactical preparation, technical preparation. If you have those two big rocks in place, it actually forgives a lot of the sins of physical preparation. Likewise, if you can select athletes that are already most of the way there. The reverse is not true, but nonetheless, I thought it would be fun to have a look at this video and highlight just why it is so terrible. So the first thing we've got here is this. Some people would call it an arabesque. Some people would call it a single leg RDL with a reach. What it is, though, is basically a warm-up exercise. I personally would use this as some kind of hip mobility exercise just to get a little bit of stretch into the hamstrings. I certainly wouldn't be using it as a developmental exercise to try and train any underlying physical quality. This weird knee tuck lift thing that he's doing at the end, not sure what's going on with that. Could you make some kind of case for opposing leg action during gait? Maybe. Not sure what it's doing though. Interestingly enough, follows it up with a single leg barbell RDL, which the guys all do with a rounded back. That might be problematic if there was any appreciable load involved in this exercise, but in this instance it doesn't, so it doesn't really matter. But it's weird that you would follow up that single leg RDL reach with a single leg barbell RDL. You're hitting the same pattern twice. Makes you wonder what's going on there. Could you make the case for one of them being for proprioception and one of them being for load? But I'm not sure really what a single leg RDL on a Bosu ball is going to transfer to proprioception during jumping, landing, cutting, sprinting, and so on. If you look at the demands of these skills, they're just so different. I'm not sure what it's doing. We get to some kind of reach. I don't know what it is. I'm just going to skip over this and get to the absolute highlight of this video, which is the barbell quarter squat with 40 kilos, so 95 pounds for Americans, on top of two inverted Bosu balls. This is just embarrassing. I don't know what the is going on here. I don't know what it's doing. Just, nowhere near the amount of load required to elicit overload and adaptation in a fully grown man. Not enough load on the bar to develop strength. Not sure that we have athletes that have any kind of problem with proprioception or balance during bilateral stance. So not sure what it's doing to develop any kind of motor control aspect. And we're at the point now where the load and the proprioception start to detract from one another. We've got this, 2-footed jump to a header to a single leg landing. Is it important in soccer, football to be able to land and maintain safe joint positioning so that you don't get injured? Absolutely, yes it is. But the more I coach, the more I look at sticking landings and being really controlled and aligned during landings. It's just not going to happen in the game. When you start adding in all of these distractions, all of these things that divert attention away from the skill itself, athletes are going to revert to whatever landing gets the job done. You see this all the time in basketball, in the NBA. You certainly see it in soccer. And I really think now that what we have to concentrate on is the development of force and the development of robust tissues, because unlike these sticking landings, force and tissue robustness do not get switched off when your attention is elsewhere. So I would rather target these two things first before I ever think about sticking landings. Likewise, if you look at how athletes actually move when they're not being coached, they're not looking to stick, which actually increases ground reaction force and shear within joints. Rather, what happens is they try and just dissipate the energy by taking hop steps and letting themselves come to a stop more slowly over greater distance. The longer the distance they can do that, the safer it's probably going to be on their joints. This is not to say that there's never going to be a situation where they need to suddenly put the brakes on to quickly decelerate or change direction. But this is probably going to be more of a performance strategy rather than an injury risk management strategy, which I'm guessing is what they're doing this for in this circuit. I have no idea what is going on with this lunge pattern where they're pushing the band out to one side. Can you make a case for managing lateral force or managing force in the frontal plane as you're working in the sagittal plane? Absolutely, yes you can. Good athletes produce in one plane, controlling the other two typically. Is this level of force going to be anything like we're going to see in the game of football or soccer when you have an athlete trying to push you off the ball? Not at all, no. So this is actually a more watered down version of what they're already doing on the field every single day, and that we know they're already robust to 99 times out of 100. Unloaded ab work, look at how tired they are whilst they're doing this ab work. There's probably no overload whatsoever. Adding rotation, there's no resistance in the transverse plane. The resistance is resisting extension as gravity tries to extend the torso. There is no resistance here, not sure what the twist is for. Lateral shuffle with resistance into a header. Do you want to add overload in the frontal plane so that guys are going to be able to project their body mass more quickly when they move laterally? Sure. Is there going to be a significant amount of overload with this band resistance that's going to result in adaptation? Not sure it is. This is going to pale in comparison to any decent loaded lower body exercise in the frontal plane, any kind of lateral lunging or lateral squat variation. We've got some other stuff in there like a TRX inverted row. We've got some TRX jackknives. Again, look at the load involved. Look at how hard they're working. This is just creating fatigue without any of the benefit of adaptation and improvement in performance. So why does this circuit suck so bad? I think to answer that question, what we need to do is go right back to first principles and ask ourselves, why are we doing what it is we're doing? What is the thought process that we need to go through as strength coaches in order to make effective decisions about training and programming? First, we have to ask is, what are the physical qualities that the sport demands, and what does elite look like? So we can build a profile and establish an end goal or a destination that we're working towards. Next thing we have to do is ask ourselves, well, what does the athlete look like right now? We need to be intelligent about how we pick tests, and we need to use that data to identify weak links within the chain so that we can prioritize certain elements over others. And we're also going to use that information to reverse engineer a path from where they are now to where we want them to be. And we're just going to break that down into a series of steps, easy to consume chunks. Just check them off one by one. And of course, we know that there's going to be a gradual intensification of training over the long term because the body habituates to training stress. We need to do more and more to keep the gains coming. And we need to ask ourselves, with each of the qualities that we're trying to address, what are the exercise conditions that are required to move the needle right now? It's basic training science. We have those principles of training like overload, specificity, reversibility. It's really, really simple stuff. And what you see here is no overload. If there is no overload, there is no adaptation. They're not going to get better. You're wasting your time. You might be generating fatigue, but I always see it as like an exchange where if you're going to pay in the price of fatigue, you need to be getting back adaptation. And quite frankly, the loads involved here, when you're talking about high qualification athletes, fully grown men, this is doing absolutely nothing. Now, if we want to be understanding, we can say, well, you know, these are multi-million-dollar athletes. These are very expensive assets. You don't necessarily want to be the strength coach that injures them squatting or doing Nordics and be labeled as the coach that injures star athletes. In reality, you're just trading an injury now for an injury later. If you don't make them robust to the demands of the game, they're just going to get hurt in the game. You might be able to avoid scrutiny a little bit more because the injury didn't happen on your time, but ultimately an intelligent high-performance director or head coach or organization is going to know that it is your fault through neglect. Second is that typically soccer, football has an absolutely atrocious training culture when it comes to dedicated physical prep. The joke is they're allergic to iron and sweat. Yes, you do have to meet athletes where they are. You can't just come in and be doing some crazy high-level program, levels of load and exertion that they're not used to, because you're gonna find yourself in a player's revolt. They're gonna be in the ear of the coach. You're gonna get fired. Nonetheless, you do have to train it is important. It is going to help prevent that significant drain on wages each year represented by non-contact injury. And there has to be a progression within that culture. Even if it's an empty bar in session one, you're adding 2.5 kilos every time you get back to the bar, you're going to be at 100 kilos by the end of the year. And this kind of like simple progression, I've seen work with clubs at this level, and they've got the results to back it up. All they would do was at the end of every single game, they would go to the weight room that they built underneath the stadium, and they would do nothing more than a couple of exercises for a couple of sets, 15 to 20 minutes, and they would just progress the load weekly and actually accumulated some significant progression in load and the robustness that comes with that. The final critique that normally comes from trying to implement heavy weight training or any kind of weight training in soccer is that they just don't have the schedule for it. If you look at like the EPL, Champions League, other teams at that level, they're playing, I think it's 3 times every 8 days. There is a lot of tactical and technical preparation that has to go on there to the detriment of physical prep. And if you look at preseasons, it's like 2 to 4 weeks. There's just not the time to really pile load on guys and detract from that tactical technical preparation. And as a result, guys get detrained. Once you start to put weight on top of them, they get really, really sore, and that's where you get the pushback. But I think that the soreness that accompanies weight training most of the time is going to be a problem related to volume, and it's going to be related to eccentric loading. So I think 2 things that can happen is if you just go crazy low volume. The example that I mentioned to you of the team in the EPL, a couple of exercises, couple of sets, nothing more. If we start to eliminate concentric loading, we can do 2-1 variations. So when we lower, it's on 2 legs. When we lift, it's on 1 leg. Suddenly we've cut that eccentric load in half. We can do sled work. We can do a whole number of different methods to try and reduce that eccentric load, but still be getting some kind of overload and adaptation in terms of concentric force production. Another thing that we can do is we can disguise the stimulus. And the most prominent example of this, I would say, is the K-box. It's had a ton of uptake in soccer, and I think that's because it doesn't look like a barbell or a dumbbell, and guys just feel a lot more comfortable with it. But we know from research that you can actually generate significant loads with a flywheel and get significant adaptations that is going to pay dividends down the line. Now, as ever, I'm sure Atletico Madrid, they put this session together with the best of intentions. Everybody is trying their best. Do I think this is the finished article by any means? No. Should anyone wanting to work in soccer look at this? Should anyone working in soccer look at this as the epitome of how players should be preparing physically to win a Champions League? Absolutely not. As ever, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, subscribe, share, comment. If there's any other videos that you would like to see in this reaction series, drop a comment below and we'll line it up. Congratulations on making it to the end of the video. Why don't you celebrate by watching more just like it? You can also help us on our quest to placate the algorithm gods by liking, sharing, subscribing, and commenting. Thanks.